Welcome to this bite-sized video for the Digital Business Services T-Level, where we'll explore Task 1 for the Data Technician Occupational Specialism. The Data Technician OS consists of 4 task-based assignments with a total duration of 29 hours, designed to assess the 6 performance outcomes shown, each of which indicate the knowledge and skills required to enable students to achieve threshold competence in the chosen occupational specialism. For each performance outcome, there will be a list of knowledge and skills. The knowledge statements show what the students need to know, and the skills are what the students need to perform. Some of this content will build upon the content delivered in Year 1. The occupational specialism will be assessed through a series of synoptic assignments which have been designed to be as occupationally realistic as possible and are externally set by NCFE. This video will focus on Task 1. Task 1 is about performing research, selecting relevant data sets, and writing a proposal considering relevant legislations, regulations, and/or principles. Now, Task 1 is split into 2 sessions that occur on a fixed date and time specified by NCFE. The dates for each task can be found in our key date schedule. Task 1 will be completed in 2 sessions within 1 day. Students will work independently under supervised conditions. And they'll need access to the following resources in order to complete the tasks. If students have any access arrangements or any reasonable adjustments, such as additional time for the assessments, then you should apply that internally and increase the time by the relevant amount. The assessment material should only be available to students during the scheduled session, so do take account of this and ensure that you have secure storage areas for students' evidence. Providers need to provide students with access to a copy of the brief with Task 1 instructions included, along with Task 1 datasets. Software applications to select and organize data. So for example, Microsoft Office, Microsoft 365, or Google Workspace. And word processing software. So this could be Microsoft Office, Microsoft 365, or Google Workspace again. Task 1 is the only task that internet access is permitted for, as the students need to perform research. NCFE will provide data sets relevant for the task, and students will need access to suitable software. And if you use Google or similar online applications, then remember that students don't have internet access for Task 2, 3, or 4, so it will need to be available offline too for students to use. Now, Task 1 is split into 3 parts, worth a total of 40 marks. Marks are divided between the skills and knowledge performance outcomes shown. Students will have a total of 5 hours to use the information in the scenario, brief, and task instructions to complete a written proposal. Part A is market research and sourcing data that will support the needs of the client. Then students look at data sets which could potentially be used for the client in Part B. And finally, Part C, students need to consider relevant legislations and practices in terms of data handling and security. When students are given the brief, it's important to carefully read it and even highlight key information given in the scenario. The client and sector will vary each year, but the kind of research students perform won't, such as finding out more information about the sector, finding data related to the sector and client's objectives, any trends identified that could help the client also. Students will put this research into their proposal, and it's important that they include their sources. This subtask is assessing PO1, and I've summarised the key aspects from the mark scheme. The evidence should have a wide range of relevant sources, that the information is linked to the client's objectives and needs. For the data, the students have sources. It should include a variety especially ones that could identify trends. So this could include historical data and identifying a pattern. And the proposal should also have some relevant and clear tables and charts too. You may wish to consider preparing students with the use of writing frames or templates for practicing how to lay out their proposal, including an introduction where students can reiterate key information from the brief and scenario, such as who the client is, what sector they have to research, what the client is wanting to do. And this could also ensure students are focused on the main purpose of the research. Another tip is to remind students of some useful terms to use when researching, and even have a search terms to use for display in the classroom. You could add to this and display tips for recognising credible sources of information, with Wikipedia being inappropriate since it's publicly contributed to. However, they could still find the original source of the information and use that. I've included some useful web links for sourcing data, and it's worth giving students frequent mini research tasks, or even challenge your students to find and use only the data source to make their argument. So they'll need to consider how valuable and relevant the data is. For Task 1B, students will need to look at the NCFE data sets and then decide which one might contain relevant data relevant to the client's needs. There's no deep analysis or processing of the data here, but students should consider the scenario and which metrics would be useful to look out for. Any potential issues with the data, such as missing information or errors, and then considering relevant legislations and practices whilst using and analysing the data. Once students have identified the most relevant data sets, they need to ensure they have provided justifications for their choices. Now, what the examiners will be looking for when marking the evidence is for students who have identified the relevant data from the data sets presented, for all the correct data sets to have been identified, the proposal and choices have made that direct connection to the client's aims and the scenario. And then finally, the problems faced by the client are understood by the student. Now, ensuring students make use of the brief and the client's needs is important throughout the assignment, so it's worth giving students example objectives and getting them to suggest what to look out for. So if the objective is to increase the sales, then some suggestions might be to see what the current sales data is saying. Is there any particular products more popular than others? And some time of the year, they may be dependent. The cost of the product or service, and how does it compare to other similar organisations offering the same product? The customers, such as age, demographics for targeted marketing, online and in person, buying habits, and what type of marketing is proven more popular, such as TV ads or social media advertising. And while students are just identifying useful data sets in Task 1B, they should check the data too. So giving students any tips or tricks or quick checks such as F5 in Excel and go to special function. Finally, Part C requires students to explain how the data sets conform to relevant legal, ethical and professional principles, which is an essential part of the data technician role. This should address the 7 principles of the data protection, such as lawfulness, fairness and transparency, purpose limitation, storage limitation, and so on. And there may be other applicable aspects depending on the scenario, such as using a competitor's data or infographic, and possible ownership or intellectual property right issues. Now, this subtask assesses performance outcome 5, and the examiners will be awarding students for identifying the regulations and guidelines that's relevant to the data sets and applying them to the data for the scenario and context in the brief, showing both a general and scenario-specific understanding of data handling and security controls. and make any recommendations for the data handling and security. Now, as students do need to demonstrate a general understanding of data security and handling, as well as scenario specific, you can provide opportunities for students to deepen their general understanding, such as producing presentations or videos, and video recording might be useful practice for task 4 later on. So when it comes to the specifics of the brief, then the best approach is to practice using different examples. But rather than you coming up with these brief scenarios, snippets, you could have students come up with their own to test each other. They could even create sample data sets which are compliant with the regulations and standards, and they have to see if their peers will spot it. Now, using projects will help to prepare students. A good suggestion would be getting students used to working with a brief, picking out key information and being able to relate this to you. You can also make use of internal staff, getting them to come in and let the students interview them. If each team uses something like Trello, the online project management software, they can track core findings, links to data, links to legislations, and anything like that what might be useful, such as notes from guest speakers whilst working collaboratively within the group. The skills to focus are reading the brief, understanding the brief, picking out key requirements, what the business wants to achieve. From this, the students can identify what data or data sets would help them meet those requirements. Now, understanding their role, as this will make clear what's expected of them throughout the occupational specialism tasks, things like collect and classify data, identify the usefulness of the data, combine data in line with business objectives, cleaning data as it usually contains errors. Your findings should help make strategic business decisions, identify patterns and trends, using statistics and logical queries, present using a dashboard, and keep a log of decisions on formatting, security and legislation, verifying and also validating data. We do hope you found this useful and have a better understanding of Task 1, and do see the other bite-sized videos that form part of this occupational specialism series. And please do scan the QR code to leave any feedback. Thank you.